Millionaire left his black bride for being poor. Years later, her daughter returned as the city's richest. The room erupted in whispers. 30 million was serious money, the kind that separated players from pretenders. Ethan's competitive instincts roared to life, but something else stirred too. Have you ever wanted to face someone who abandoned you? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She had 17 years to perfect her revenge, and today she would make her father pay in the only currency he understood: humiliation in front of his peers. The Miami auction house buzzed with testosterone and designer cologne. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks above mahogany tables where America's wealthiest men sat with their checkbooks ready. Ethan Cross adjusted his Italian silk tie and surveyed the room like a king reviewing his subjects. At 52, his silver hair and sharp jawline still commanded attention. 20 years of building the Cross luxury empire had taught him one thing: money talks, and he spoke fluent wealth. Tonight's prize, a historic Miami beachfront property, would crown his collection. No one had deeper pockets. No one had more influence. Then she walked in. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as every conversation stopped mid-sentence. She moved through the crowd like liquid obsidian, her black dress hugging curves that could stop traffic. But it wasn't just her beauty that commanded attention. It was the way she carried herself. Confident, dangerous, like she owned every eye that followed her movement. Ethan felt his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with business. She couldn't be more than 25, but something about her presence made grown men step aside. Her skin was the color of rich caramel, and her dark eyes swept the room with calculating precision. When those eyes landed on him, he felt exposed for the first time in decades. The auctioneer called for attention, but Ethan's focus remained locked on the mystery woman. She took a seat 3 rows ahead, crossing her legs with deliberate slowness. The motion sent heat shooting through his body. Inappropriate thoughts for a man his age, but her beauty was impossible to ignore. Ladies and gentlemen, we begin with the crown jewel of tonight's collection, the historic Whitmore Estate, spanning 12 acres of prime Miami beachfront. Bidding started at 10 million. Ethan raised his paddle without hesitation. This was his territory, his game, his victory. But then she raised her paddle. 15 million. Her voice carried across the room like velvet over steel. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Who was this woman challenging Miami's most powerful real estate mogul? Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd played this game too long to be intimidated by someone's pretty face. 20 million, he countered, his voice steady, but his heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with money. She turned in her seat, meeting his gaze directly. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. 30 million. The room erupted in whispers. 30 million was serious money, the kind that separated players from pretenders. Ethan's competitive instincts roared to life, but something else stirred too. The way she looked at him felt personal, like she knew exactly who he was and exactly how to get under his skin. 40 million, he declared, standing to ensure she saw his full authority. She stood too, her movements graceful and deliberate. The black dress seemed to shimmer under the chandelier light as she turned to face him completely. 60 million. The gasp that went through the room was audible. $60 million. For one property. In one bid. Ethan's mouth went dry. He had the money, but spending that much would strain even his resources. More importantly, who had that kind of cash to throw around so casually? His mind raced through possibilities. Russian oligarch, tech billionaire, oil heiress. But she looked so young, so familiar somehow. Something about her bone structure, the way she tilted her head when she smiled, triggered a memory he couldn't quite grasp. 70 million, he said, his voice betraying the first hint of uncertainty. She laughed, a sound like crystal bells with an edge of steel. $100 million. The room fell dead silent. $100 million. The number hung in air like a nuclear bomb. Ethan felt sweat gathering at his collar despite the air conditioning. 100 million would devastate his liquid assets. But backing down now would devastate his reputation. He looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of a bluff. What he found there made his blood freeze. Those weren't the eyes of someone taking a risk. Those were the eyes of someone who already knew she'd won. 100 million going once. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. Something in her expression told him she had deeper pockets than he'd imagined. More than that, she looked like she was enjoying his discomfort. This wasn't just business. This was personal. Going twice. The hammer fell like a judge's gavel. Sold to the young lady in black for $100 million. Applause erupted, but Ethan barely heard it. He watched her accept congratulations from strangers, her smile never reaching her eyes. When the auctioneer asked for her name for the records, she took the microphone with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention. Zara Lawson, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Lawson. The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. His legs nearly gave out as memories crashed over him like a tsunami. Amara Lawson, Atlanta. 17 years ago, the woman he'd loved and abandoned. The woman who disappeared carrying his child. His child. The room seemed to tilt as he stared at the young woman's face with new recognition. The bone structure wasn't just familiar. It was his own, softened by her mother's beauty. The confident way she held herself, the calculating intelligence in her eyes, even the stubborn set of her jaw when she'd outbid him. She was his daughter, and she just humiliated him in front of every important person in Miami. Zara turned toward him as the crowd began to disperse, her smile transforming into something that made his blood run cold. She walked toward him with predatory grace, each step deliberate and measured. The conversations around them faded as people sensed the tension crackling between them. "Mr. Cross," she said when she reached him, her voice honey-sweet with poisonous undertones. "I believe we have some unfinished business. My mother sends her regards." Have you ever wanted to face someone who abandoned you? What would you say to them after 17 years? Let me know in the comments what you think Zara should do next. 17 years ago, he walked away from love because his family convinced him that money mattered more than the woman carrying his child. Atlanta, 1997. The summer heat pressed down on the city like a wet blanket, but inside the underground jazz club, the air was thick with smoke and possibility. Ethan Cross was 25 then, fresh out of Harvard Business School and eager to prove himself worthy of the Cross family fortune. He'd come to Atlanta to oversee a hotel acquisition, his first major deal without his father's supervision. He never expected to fall in love. Amara Lawson moved between tables like poetry in motion, her laugh cutting through the saxophone music and cigarette haze. She was everything his world had taught him to avoid. Working class, black, and completely unimpressed by his expensive watch or designer clothes. When he tried to buy her a drink, she looked him up and down and said, "Honey, I could buy my own drinks. Why can't buy is a reason to talk to you?" That should have been the end of it. Ethan Cross didn't chase women who rejected him, but something about her fire, her refusal to be intimidated by his wealth, made him want things he'd never wanted before. He came back the next night, and the next, and the next. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," Amara said on his 5th visit, sliding into the booth across from him. Her brown skin glowed in the dim light, and her eyes held intelligence that made his chest tight. But persistence without purpose is just stalking. "Maybe I like the music," he said, gesturing toward the stage where a trumpet player poured his soul into the brass. "Maybe you like something else," she replied, her gaze direct and challenging. Question is, what happens when summer ends and you go back to your real life? Ethan felt heat that had nothing to do with the Atlanta humidity. "Who says I'm going anywhere?" Their first kiss happened in the alley behind the club, pressed against brick walls while rain started to fall. Her lips tasted like strawberry lip gloss and rebellion. When she pulled away, her eyes were serious. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Because I don't play games with rich boys looking for a summer adventure." He answered by kissing her again, harder this time, his hands tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Does that feel like a game to you?" The next 3 months were the most real Ethan had ever felt. Amara worked 2 jobs, waitressing at the jazz club and cleaning offices downtown, but she never complained. She had dreams of opening her own restaurant someday, plans she'd mapped out in notebooks filled with recipes and business projections. Her intelligence amazed him. Her strength humbled him. They spent afternoons in her tiny apartment above a bakery, making love on sheets that smelled like fresh bread and promises. Amara's body was soft in all the right places, firm where it mattered. When she moved beneath him, her eyes never left his face, like she was trying to memorize every expression. "What are you thinking about?" she'd whisper afterward, tracing patterns on his chest while sweat cooled on their skin. "You," he'd answer honestly. "Always you." But reality has a way of intruding on paradise. The phone calls from New York became more frequent. His father's voice carried disapproval across the miles. "This acquisition is taking too long, Ethan. We need you back home. There are important people you need to meet, connections to make. Just a few more weeks," Ethan would say, looking at Amara reading in the corner, her legs tucked under her like a contented cat. "Time isn't unlimited, son. Neither are opportunities." The breaking point came on a humid Tuesday in September. Amara had been quiet all week, distracted in a way that made Ethan's stomach clench with worry. When he found her in the bathroom that morning, staring at something in her hand, the world shifted on its axis. "Is that?" he started. "Pregnant," she said, her voice steady but her hand shaking. "I'm pregnant." The pregnancy test sat between them like a tiny pink bomb, about to destroy everything they thought they knew about their future. Ethan's mind raced through calculations, his father's expectations, the family business, the life he was supposed to live versus the life he wanted. Amara set the test on the counter and turned to face him. "I know this isn't what you planned. I know your family has expectations. If you want to leave, I'll understand." But looking at her, beautiful, strong, carrying his child, Ethan felt something click into place. This was real. This was what mattered. "Are you kidding? Amara, I love you. We'll figure this out together." The relief in her eyes made his chest ache. She moved into his arms, and he held her tight, breathing in her scent of vanilla and hope. For one perfect moment, everything felt possible. Then his phone rang. His father's name on the caller ID felt like a death sentence. "Ethan, we need to talk. Now, I'm flying down tonight." That evening, Ethan paced his hotel room like a caged animal, waiting for the conversation that would change everything. When his father arrived with his mother and uncle in tow, their expressions told him this wasn't a social visit. "Sit down, son," his father said, his voice carrying the authority that had built a business empire. "We need to discuss your future. Have you ever been told your love wasn't appropriate? How did you fight for what mattered? Share your story in the comments below." His mother's words cut deeper than any blade. "Choose the family fortune or choose her. But you cannot have both." The hotel suite felt like a courtroom as Ethan faced his family's tribunal. His father, Richard Cross, commanded the room from behind the mahogany desk, his silver hair and steel gray eyes reflecting 40 years of business victories. His mother, Eleanor, perched on the edge of the sofa like a beautiful bird of prey, her diamond jewelry catching the light with every calculated movement. Uncle Charles stood by the window, silent but imposing, the family enforcer who'd made more than one problem disappear over the years. "Ethan," his father began, his voice measured and cold, "we've received some disturbing information about your activities here in Atlanta." Heat crept up Ethan's neck. "What kind of information?" Eleanor's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Oh, darling, don't play innocent. Did you really think we wouldn't find out about your little romance with the help?" "Her name is Amara," Ethan said, his jaw clenching. "And she's not the help. She's a waitress," Charles interrupted from the window. "From the wrong side of town, with the wrong background, dating the future heir to a fortune she could never understand or deserve." Ethan stood, anger flooding his system. "You had me follow?" "Of course we did," Eleanor said, examining her manicured nails. "The cross name means something, Ethan. It opens doors, creates opportunities, builds legacies, but also requires protection from those who would tarnish it." "Tarnish it?" Ethan's voice rose. You mean like falling in love with someone who isn't white and wealthy? The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's expression hardened into the mask Ethan had seen him wear when destroying business competitors. This isn't about race, son. This is about class, about breeding, about understanding that some combinations simply don't work in our world. Your world, Ethan corrected, not mine. Eleanor stood, moving toward him with predatory grace. Oh, but it is your world, darling. Every dollar in your trust fund, every connection that's opened doors for you, every advantage you've enjoyed since birth, it all comes from this world. The question is, are you prepared to give it all up for a summer fling? It's not a fling, Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. I love her. Love, Charles scoffed. You're 25 years old. You think this is love because it's different, exotic. But what happens when the novelty wears off? When you're sitting in a trailer park somewhere, working a regular job, watching your children grow up without opportunities because their father threw away his birthright for temporary passion? The words hit like physical blows. Ethan had never considered the practical realities, where they'd live, how they'd survive, what kind of life he could provide without his family's wealth. In Atlanta's summer heat, with Amara in his arms, those details had seemed unimportant. But in this air-conditioned suite, facing his family's disapproval, reality felt crushing. There's something else, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Something you need to know before you make any permanent decisions. She pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the coffee table. Inside were photographs, Amara with another man, laughing over dinner, walking hand in hand through downtown Atlanta. Ethan's stomach dropped as he recognized the man. Marcus Williams, a local businessman who'd been mentioned in the newspapers recently. These were taken last week, Eleanor said gently, while you were in meetings. The photographs felt like ice in Ethan's hands. Amara looked happy, relaxed. More relaxed than she'd seemed with him lately. There has to be an explanation. Of course there is, Richard said. She's hedging her bets. Smart girl, really. The rich white boy was fun for a summer, but winter's coming. Time to find someone more suitable. Ethan's mind reeled. The photographs looked intimate, but something felt wrong. The angles, the timing, the convenient discovery. You set this up, Charles smiled from the window. We investigated her background, certainly, but we didn't create these moments, Ethan. We simply documented them. She's pregnant, Ethan said, playing his last card. With my child. The room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Eleanor's facade cracked for the first time, revealing something ugly underneath. Well, she said slowly, that does complicate things. Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Actually, it simplifies them. If she's truly pregnant, and that's a significant if, there are ways to handle such situations. Quietly, generously, without destroying your future or ours. You're talking about paying her off, Ethan said, disgust churning in his stomach. I'm talking about providing for a child, if one exists, without requiring you to sacrifice everything your family has built, Richard replied. Trust funds can be established. Education expenses covered. Medical costs handled. But marriage? Public acknowledgement? Integration into our social circle? That's impossible. Eleanor moved closer, her voice becoming maternal and poisonous simultaneously. Darling, think about what you're considering. This girl, yes, she's beautiful. I'll grant you that. But she's using you. The pregnancy, if real, was designed to trap you, to force you into choices that benefit her at your expense. That's not true, Ethan said, but doubt crept into his voice. The timing had been convenient. And those photographs. Choose, Richard said, standing to his full height. The family fortune, your inheritance, your future, your children's future, or choose her. But understand this. If you choose her, you choose poverty. You choose obscurity. You choose to throw away everything your ancestors built so that your children can struggle the way she struggled. The ultimatum hung in the air like a sword over Ethan's head. Everything he'd known, everything he'd expected from life, balanced against 3 months of the most genuine happiness he'd ever experienced. But those photographs kept flashing in his mind. Amara with another man. Amara laughing. Amara moving on while he agonized over their future. "I need time to think," he said finally. "Time is exactly what you don't have," Eleanor replied. "She's probably expecting you right now, ready to share the happy news about the baby, ready to start planning your wedding and your joint bank account. How long before she starts asking for money for medical expenses? For apartment deposits? For wedding rings?" Each question felt like a nail in the coffin of his dreams. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to summon Amara's face, but all he could see were those photographs. Had she been playing him all along? Had his family been right about her motivations? When he opened his eyes, 3 sets of expectant faces waited for his answer. His future hung in the balance, and he had to choose between love and security, between passion and privilege, between the life he wanted and the life he'd been trained to want. That night, he lay in Amara's bed for the last time, watching her sleep in the moonlight streaming through her small window. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach, and her face looked peaceful in a way that made his chest ache. She trusted him. She loved him. She carried his child. But his family's words echoed in his mind. Different worlds, impossible combinations, children without opportunities. In those photographs, the evidence that maybe she wasn't as committed as she seemed. As dawn broke over Atlanta, Ethan made his choice. He kissed Amara's forehead gently, careful not to wake her, and whispered words she would never hear. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Then he dressed quietly and walked out of her life forever. When has family pressure made you compromise your values? What would you have done differently? Tell me in the comments what you think Ethan should have chosen. She disappeared into the night with nothing but his child growing inside her and a promise to herself that she would never need anyone again. Amara woke to empty sheets and the sound of silence that felt different from sleep. The indent where Ethan's head had rested was still warm, but something in the air told her he wasn't coming back. She found the note on her kitchen table, written on hotel stationery in his careful handwriting. "I'm sorry. This isn't what either of us wanted, but it's what has to happen. Take care of yourself." That was it. 20 words to end 3 months of promises and a lifetime of possibilities. The pregnancy test still sat on her bathroom counter like evidence of a crime she'd committed against herself. Amara stared at the 2 pink lines that had changed everything and felt something cold settle in her chest where love used to live. She wasn't naive. She'd known the odds of keeping a rich white boy past summer were slim. But carrying his child, that changed the mathematics of heartbreak. For 3 days, she stayed in her apartment, calling in sick to both jobs while she figured out what came next. The walls felt smaller each day, closing in like a coffin built for dreams that died too young. On the 4th day, she made 2 phone calls that would redirect her entire life. The first was to a cousin in Chicago who owed her a favor. The second was to her landlord, giving notice. "You sure about this, baby girl?" asked Mrs. Patterson from the apartment next door, watching Amara pack her few belongings into garbage bags. "That boy might come back. They sometimes do when they get lonely enough." Amara folded the dress she'd worn on their first real date, remembering how Ethan's eyes had lit up when he saw her. Then she shoved it deep into the bag where she couldn't see it anymore. "He's not coming back, and I wouldn't take him if he did." The lie felt necessary. Self-preservation required building walls around the truth that part of her would always wait for his return. Chicago in October was brutal. Wind off the lake that cut through her thin Georgia jacket, and a concrete jungle that swallowed dreams as efficiently as Atlanta humidity. But Chicago also offered something Atlanta couldn't: anonymity. Here, she could disappear completely from Ethan Cross's world and build something new from nothing. Her cousin Denise lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side, working 3 jobs to support her own 2 kids. "You can have the couch for a month," she said, "but after that, you need your own place." "I can't feed another mouth long-term." Amara understood. Generosity had limits when survival was the daily priority. The jobs she found were harsh: cleaning office buildings at night, stocking shelves at dawn, babysitting on weekends. Her hands cracked from chemical cleaners, her feet ached from standing, and her growing belly made everything more difficult. But each paycheck, no matter how small, was proof that she could survive without anyone's charity. The pregnancy progressed in secret. She told no one about the father, creating a story about a boyfriend who died in a car accident. Tragic but untraceable. The lie came easier each time she told it, until even she sometimes forgot the truth buried underneath. Month by month, her body changed. Her breasts grew heavy and tender. Her belly curved outward. Her skin stretched to accommodate the life growing inside. But instead of feeling connected to Ethan through their child, she felt more distant from him with each passing day. This baby was hers now, hers alone. She saved every penny, living on instant noodles and cheap bread while putting money aside for the birth. No insurance, no family support, no father to help with expenses. Just her baby, and a determination that had been forged in the fire of abandonment. Zara was born on a snowy February morning in a county hospital where charity cases went to give birth. Amara held her daughter for the first time and felt something shift in the universe. This tiny person with caramel skin and serious dark eyes looked nothing like Ethan. She was purely her own creation, beautiful and perfect and completely theirs. "She's strong," the nurse said, checking Zara's vitals. "Look at those hands. She's going to be someone important." Amara kissed her daughter's forehead and made a promise that would shape both their lives. "We're going to build something amazing, baby girl. Something that belongs only to us." The first years were a marathon of exhaustion and small victories. Amara worked nights when Zara slept, arranged childcare through a network of other single mothers, and slowly climbed from poverty toward stability. She enrolled in community college classes, studying business during stolen moments between jobs. By Zara's 5th birthday, they had their own apartment, small but clean, with windows that let in actual sunlight. By her 10th, Amara had started a small catering business that specialized in soul food with gourmet twists. By her 15th, they owned a restaurant that drew lines around the block. But success didn't erase the hunger for something more. Late at night, when the restaurant was clean and Zara was asleep over her homework, Amara would sit at her computer researching a name she'd never forgotten: Ethan Cross. She watched his empire grow from newspaper articles and business magazines, saw his marriage to a blonde socialite, witnessed his rise to prominence in exactly the world she'd expected. She never felt jealous of his success. She felt something more dangerous, competitive. "Mom," Zara said one evening when she was 16, finding Amara reading about another Cross Industries acquisition. "Who is he? You've been watching him for years." Amara looked at her daughter, brilliant, beautiful, driven, and felt the weight of secrets she'd carried alone. "Someone who taught me an important lesson." "What lesson?" "That the only person you can count on is yourself. Everyone else will leave when things get complicated." Zara studied her mother's face with the intelligence that would later make her a business prodigy. "Is he my father?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Amara could have lied, could have maintained a fiction about the dead boyfriend. Instead, she chose truth. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because he chose his family's money over us, and I chose to build something better without him." Zara absorbed this information with a calm calculation that made her seem older than her years. "What's his name?" "Ethan Cross. Cross Industries. The real estate empire. You know about him?" Zara smiled, and for the first time, Amara saw something of Ethan in her daughter's expression. The same confidence, the same hunger for victory. "I've been researching successful businesses for a school project." His company came up in my research. That night, mother and daughter sat together researching the man who'd shaped both their lives through his absence. They studied his business model, his expansion strategies, his weaknesses and strengths. What started as curiosity became education. What started as education became planning. "He has no idea I exist," Zara said, scrolling through photos of Ethan at charity galas and business conferences. "None." "That gives us an advantage." Amara looked at her daughter with surprise and pride. "Advantage for what?" Zara's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "For when we're ready to introduce ourselves." 17 years later, during a heated corporate auction in Miami, A mysterious young woman in a sleek black dress outbid every tycoon in the room, including Ethan himself. To his shock, she revealed her last name, Lawson, the very name he once erased from his life. The crowd gasped. Ethan's abandoned daughter had returned, not as the forgotten child of poverty, but as the wealthiest woman in the city, determined to confront the father who once cast her mother aside. Watching her daughter face down the man who abandoned them, Amara smiled for the first time since that terrible night 17 years ago. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself completely after betrayal? What gave you strength to start over? Share your story in the comments below. He thought he buried his past, but his daughter had spent 17 years digging it up, and now she held every secret that could destroy him. The Miami auction house had emptied except for staff cleaning up champagne glasses and folding chairs. Crystal chandeliers cast long shadows across marble floors where America's wealthiest had just witnessed something unprecedented. Ethan Cross being outbid, outmaneuvered, and publicly humiliated by a 25-year-old woman who shared his DNA. Ethan stood frozen near the registration table, his expensive suit feeling like a costume that no longer fit. His security team hovered nearby, unsure whether to approach or maintain distance. The normal post-auction networking, handshakes, business cards, private conversations worth millions, had dissolved into whispered speculation about the mysterious Zara Lawson. She approached him with the predatory grace of someone who'd planned this moment down to the smallest detail. Her black dress moved like liquid silk, and her heels clicked against marble with military precision. Up close, Ethan could see features that made his chest ache. His mother's nose, his own stubborn jawline, but softened by Amara's beauty into something that was purely, devastatingly unique. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice carrying just enough warmth to seem polite while her eyes remained cold as winter. "I was hoping we could have a private conversation." His mouth felt full of sand. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Her laugh was musical and sharp. "Oh, but we have. You've known me since I was the size of grape. You just chose not to stick around for the introduction." The auction house staff worked around them, pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Ethan's reputation, carefully built over decades, balanced on the edge of a knife held by a daughter he'd never acknowledged. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion somewhere more private," he managed. "Worried about witnesses?" Zara tilted her head, studying him like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. "Don't worry, father. I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here to make a deal." The word father hit him like a physical blow. Hearing it from her lips made everything real in a way that 17 years of buried guilt hadn't achieved. This wasn't some nightmare he could wake up from. This was his daughter, grown and dangerous, and standing close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something expensive and confident that probably cost more than most people made in a month. "What kind of deal?" he asked, hating how his voice betrayed his nervousness. "The kind that could save your reputation, or destroy it completely. Your choice." She gestured toward a quiet corner where leather chairs surrounded a small table. As they walked, Ethan became uncomfortably aware of how she moved. Confident, sensual in a way that reminded him painfully of her mother. The comparison made him feel sick. This was his child, but she was also a woman who'd clearly inherited Amar's ability to make men lose their minds. They sat across from each other like negotiators preparing for war. Zara crossed her legs slowly, deliberately, and Ethan forced himself to focus on her face instead of the motion. Even that was dangerous territory. Her beauty was impossible to ignore, and knowing she was his daughter only made the attraction more disturbing. "You've done well for yourself," she said, pulling out a tablet and scrolling through what looked like financial documents. "Cross Industries is worth approximately $4 billion. Impressive growth from a man who abandoned his pregnant girlfriend because she wasn't wealthy enough." Each word was chosen to wound. Ethan loosened his tie, feeling sweat gather despite the air conditioning. "It wasn't that simple." "No? Then explain it to me." "Explain how a man who claimed to love my mother could disappear overnight, leaving her to raise his child alone in poverty while he built an empire. The accusation hung between them like toxic gas. Ethan searched for words that could justify decisions he'd spent 17 years trying to forget. My family, there were complications, expectations, pressures you couldn't understand. Oh, I understand pressure perfectly. Zara's smile was blade sharp. I understand the pressure of working 3 jobs to pay for college. I understand the pressure of watching your mother cry herself to sleep because the man she loved valued his trust fund more than her heart. I understand the pressure of growing up knowing your father considered you a mistake he needed to hide. That's not. Ethan started. True. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing. Then where were you when she had complications during pregnancy and couldn't afford proper medical care? Where were you when I was born 6 weeks early and spent a month in the hospital? Where were you for birthdays, holidays, graduations, or any of the moments when a daughter might need her father? Each question was a dagger between his ribs. Ethan had always imagined Amara moving on, finding someone better, building a happy life that proved leaving was the right choice. He'd never considered the detailed reality of struggle, of a woman raising his child alone while he attended charity galas and business dinners. I didn't know, he said weakly. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. Zara sat back, her expression shifting from anger to calculation. But we're not here to relitigate the past. We're here to discuss the future. Specifically, your future. She turned the tablet toward him, displaying a series of documents that made his blood run cold. Bank records, property deeds, investment portfolios, his entire financial empire laid out in devastating detail. How did you get access to private financial information? The same way I got wealthy enough to outbid you tonight. I'm very good at finding what I need. Her smile held no warmth. The question isn't how I know about your questionable tax strategies or your creative accounting methods. The question is what I plan to do with that information. Ethan's mind raced through possibilities, each more devastating than the last. A financial investigation could unravel decades of carefully constructed deals. His marriage, his social standing, his business empire. Everything could crumble if the wrong information reached the wrong people. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara leaned back, savoring his discomfort like fine wine. I want you to understand what real power feels like. For 17 years, you held all the cards, money, connections, influence. You could make problems disappear, including the problem of an inconvenient girlfriend and her unwanted pregnancy. She stood, pacing around his chair with predatory grace. But now I hold the cards. I have enough money to buy and sell you twice over. I have information that could destroy everything you built. And most importantly, I have something you'll never have again, which is the moral high ground. She stopped behind his chair, her voice close to his ear. See, I didn't abandon anyone. I didn't break any promises. I didn't choose money over love. All I did was succeed despite you. Not because of you. The proximity was unsettling. Her perfume, her warmth, the way her breath moved against his neck. It all reminded him too powerfully of her mother. But where Amara had been soft and yielding, Zara was sharp edges and controlled danger. So what's the deal? He asked, turning to face her. Simple. You're going to help me acquire something I want. And in return, I won't destroy you. Yet, what do you want to acquire? Her smile was pure predator. Your company. Piece by piece, deal by deal, until Cross Industries becomes Lawson Industries. I want to watch you lose everything the same way my mother lost everything when you abandoned her. The audacity took his breath away. That's impossible, even with your resources. Is it? She pulled up another document on her tablet. I've been preparing for this moment since I was 16. I know every weakness in your corporate structure, every debt you've hidden, every enemy you've made. And I have more liquid capital than you can imagine. Where did you get that kind of money? The same place you got yours. I built it. The difference is, I built it honestly. She sat back down, crossing her legs with deliberate slowness. Tech investments, real estate flips, cryptocurrency trading, all completely legal and ethically sound. Amazing what you can accomplish when you're not weighed down by family guilt or social expectations. Ethan studied her face, searching for any trace of the little girl she'd once been. Instead, he found calculation, intelligence, and a hunger for victory that he recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror for decades. She was his daughter in every way that mattered, and that made her exponentially more dangerous than any business rival he'd ever faced. "This is about revenge," he said. "This is about justice. There's a difference, though I don't expect you to understand it." She stood to leave, then paused. "Oh, and father? I'll be seeing you very soon. I've arranged to lease office space in your building. 23rd floor. We'll practically be neighbors." The thought of seeing her daily, of being reminded constantly of his failures and her success, made his stomach clench. "You can't be serious. Deadly serious. I want you to see me every day. I want you to remember what you threw away. And I want you to wonder every single morning when you look in the mirror if today will be the day I decide to stop playing games. If you could confront someone who hurt your family, what would you demand from them? Let me know in the comments what you think Zara's real endgame is." She didn't just inherit her mother's beauty. She inherited her genius for revenge, served cold after 17 years of careful planning. The 23rd floor of the Cross Tower had been empty for 6 months. Too expensive for most tenants. Not prestigious enough for the corporate giants who usually occupied space in Ethan's building. When Zara's company, Lawson Enterprises, signed a 5-year lease at full asking price, Ethan's property managers celebrated the unexpected windfall. Ethan felt like he was watching his own execution. From his penthouse office on the 40th floor, he could see construction crews transforming the space below into something that looked more like a war room than a business office. Glass walls, state-of-the-art technology, and a conference table that could seat 20 people who looked like they meant business. "Sir," his assistant, Margaret, knocked on his door frame. "The reports you requested." Ethan took the manila folder with hands that trembled slightly. Inside were 3 investigative reports on Zara Lawson, each more unsettling than the last. The woman who'd outbid him at the auction wasn't just wealthy. She was a financial prodigy who'd built her empire with surgical precision. Started her first business at 19, a meal delivery service targeting college students. Sold it 2 years later for $12 million. Used that money to fund a tech startup focused on financial planning apps. Sold that for $80 million. Reinvested in cryptocurrency before it exploded, then got out before it crashed. Real estate investments across 3 states, all profitable. Stock market trades that read like a masterclass in timing and intuition. At 25, Zara Lawson was worth approximately $2 billion. More importantly, every dollar had been earned through legal means that left no room for attack or criticism. How was this possible? Ethan muttered, reading through the investment timeline. No trust fund, no family money, no wealthy benefactors. Just pure intelligence and determination starting from nothing. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoying your light reading?" Ethan looked down at the 23rd floor, where he could see a figure standing at the window. Even from 17 stories up, he recognized her silhouette. She raised her hand in a small wave, and he felt his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The next week brought the first wave of attacks. Nothing illegal, nothing that could be traced directly to Zara, but a series of coincidences that began dismantling his empire piece by carefully planned piece. A major hotel deal fell through when environmental concerns suddenly surfaced about the proposed location. An apartment complex he'd been developing for 3 years hit unexpected zoning complications. 2 of his biggest investors pulled out of projects, citing concerns about market instability. Each blow was precisely targeted, designed to create maximum damage without leaving fingerprints. Ethan recognized the strategy because he'd used it himself countless times over the years. The student had learned from the master, and now she was teaching him lessons he'd never wanted to know. "We need to fight back," said James Morrison, his chief financial officer, during their emergency strategy meeting. "This isn't random. Someone's targeting us systematically." "Any idea who?" Ethan asked, though he knew the answer. "Could be the Richests. We outbid them on that Miami property last month. Or maybe the tech crowd. They've been looking to expand into real estate. Ethan nodded, letting his team speculate while he stared out at the 23rd floor. Through the glass walls, he could see Zara in a meeting with what looked like a dozen lawyers and financial advisors. She was wearing a red dress that hugged her curve in ways that made him deeply uncomfortable, considering she was his daughter. But uncomfortable or not, he couldn't deny that she was magnificent. The way she commanded the room, the confidence in her gestures, the respect she clearly commanded from men twice her age, it all reminded him of himself at her age, hungry and determined to prove his worth. The difference was that he'd had family money to fall back on. She'd built everything from scratch. His phone buzzed again. Conference room B in 10 minutes. Come alone. Ethan's stomach clenched. A direct summons from his daughter felt like walking into a trap, but ignoring her seemed even more dangerous. He told Margaret to clear his schedule and took the elevator down 17 floors, feeling like he was descending into hell. Conference room B was small, intimate, designed for private negotiations. Zara sat at the head of the table, looking like she owned not just the room but the entire building. Her red dress was professionally cut, but impossibly distracting, and her smile held the kind of confidence that made grown men make stupid decisions. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I thought it was time we discussed terms." "Terms for what?" "Your surrender." The word hung in the air like a knife blade. Ethan sat down carefully, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity while his world crumbled around him. "I don't surrender. Ever. No? Let me show you something that might change your mind." She slid a tablet across the table, displaying a document that made his blood freeze. It was a contract, a merger agreement that would effectively absorb Cross Industries into Lawson Enterprises. The terms were generous enough to avoid accusations of a hostile takeover, but the result would be the same. His family's empire would become her subsidiary. "This is insane," he said, pushing the tablet away. "I'd never agree to this." "Wouldn't you?" She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "What if I told you that 3 of your major investors are ready to pull out? What if I mentioned that the IRS has received anonymous tips about certain accounting irregularities in your books? What if I suggested that your wife might be interested to learn about some of your more creative business entertaining?" Each threat was delivered with surgical precision. Ethan felt sweat gathering at his collar as he realized how thoroughly she'd researched his vulnerabilities. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She pulled out her phone, showing him a series of text messages. "Charles Richardson is ready to withdraw from the Harbor Point project. Maria Santos has concerns about your environmental impact studies. And your wife's divorce attorney has already been contacted by someone claiming to have interesting photographs. You can't prove any wrongdoing. I don't have to prove anything. I just have to create doubt, suspicion, questions that make people nervous about doing business with you." Her smile was razor sharp. "Reputation is everything in our world, Ethan. You taught me that." The casual use of his first name felt more intimate than any business meeting had a right to be. Combined with the way she leaned forward, the scent of her perfume, and the intensity of her gaze, the whole situation felt charged with an electricity that made him deeply uncomfortable. "What do you really want?" he asked. "I want to watch you lose everything, the same way my mother lost everything when you abandoned her. I want you to know what it feels like to have your world collapse, because someone you trusted decided you weren't worth fighting for." Her voice carried years of buried pain beneath the professional coldness. For the first time since she'd walked into the auction house, Ethan saw the hurt little girl underneath the powerful businesswoman. It made her more dangerous, not less. "And if I refuse, then I stop being subtle. Everything I've done so far has been gentle persuasion. You haven't seen what I can do when I'm actually trying to hurt someone." She stood to leave, smoothing her dress with movements that drew his attention to curves he had no business noticing. At the door, she paused. "Oh, and Ethan, I'd be careful about any new business partners who approach you. Not everyone is who they seem to be. Some people are very good at getting close to their targets." As the door closed behind her, Ethan realized he was holding his breath. His daughter was beautiful, brilliant, and absolutely committed to destroying him. And the most terrifying part was that he was starting to understand why Amara had fallen in love with someone willing to fight for what they wanted. The irony wasn't lost on him. The best parts of himself lived on in the daughter who hated him most. Is revenge ever justified? How far would you go to get justice for your family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy becomes more than an ally. They become the temptation you never saw coming. Marcus Williams had worked for Ethan Cross for 8 years, climbing from junior analyst to senior vice president through pure talent and relentless dedication. At 32, he was the youngest member of the executive team, the son of Jamaican immigrants who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities they'd never had. His loyalty to Cross Industries wasn't just professional, it was personal gratitude for the chance to build something meaningful. Until the morning, he found himself in an elevator with a woman systematically destroying his mentor's empire. Going up, Zara asked, though she was clearly the only reason the elevator had stopped on the 23rd floor. Marcus hesitated. He'd been watching her from a distance for 2 weeks, studying her movements like a general studying enemy territory. Up close, she was even more devastating than he'd imagined. The black business suit she wore was conservative enough for any boardroom, but couldn't hide the curves underneath or the way her presence seemed to electrify the air around her. 40th floor, he said, stepping into what felt like a beautiful trap. Marcus Williams, she said, pressing the button for his floor without asking. Senior VP, Strategic Development, MBA from Wharton, previously worked at Goldman Sachs. Parents own a small restaurant in Brooklyn that's been struggling since the pandemic. The casual recitation of his personal details sent chills down his spine. You've done your homework. I do my homework on everyone who might be useful. She turned to face him fully, and he caught the scent of her perfume. Something expensive and confident that made his pulse quicken despite every professional instinct screaming danger. The question is whether you're as smart as your resume suggests. The elevator rose slowly, each floor bringing them closer to his office and further from any chance of retreating from whatever game she was playing. Marcus found himself studying her profile, the elegant line of her neck, the way her lips curved when she smiled, the intelligence that radiated from her like heat. Smart enough to recognize a setup, he said, "This isn't a setup. This is an opportunity." The elevator stopped at the 40th floor, but she pressed the close button before he could exit. "Have dinner with me tonight. I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not asking you to betray your boss. I'm asking you to hear what I have to say over a meal that costs more than most people make in a week." Her smile was pure temptation wrapped in designer clothing. What's the worst that could happen? Marcus could think of several dozen terrible outcomes, starting with losing his job and ending with losing his mind to a woman who was clearly more dangerous than she appeared. But when she looked at him like that, like he was the most interesting person she'd met in years, rational thought became negotiable. "One dinner," he said. "Public place. No business discussed. Deal." She pressed the button for his floor, and this time the doors opened. 8 o'clock. The Ritz-Carlton. Asked for the Lawson reservation. As the elevator doors closed with her inside, Marcus realized he'd just agreed to have dinner with a woman who could destroy his career with a phone call. More troubling, he was looking forward to it. The Ritz-Carlton's rooftop restaurant offered panoramic views of Miami skyline, but Marcus barely noticed the scenery. Zara had changed from her business suit into a dress that was somehow both elegant and sinful. Deep blue silk that brought out the warmth in her skin and clung to her body in ways that made concentration impossible. "You look nervous," she said, settling into the chair across from him at a table clearly designed for romance rather than business. "I'm having dinner with someone who's actively trying to destroy my boss." Nervous seems appropriate. "I'm not trying to destroy him. I'm trying to teach him a lesson he should have learned 17 years ago." She ordered wine without consulting the menu, clearly comfortable in environments that still intimidated Marcus despite his success. "Tell me about your father." The change of subject caught him off guard. "My father's been dead for 20 years. "I know. Car accident when you were 12. Killed by a drunk driver who happened to be the son of a very wealthy family. The son received probation and community service. Your family received a lawsuit when they tried to seek justice." Marcus felt his chest tighten. His father's death was still a wound that hadn't healed properly, made worse by the injustice that followed. What do you know about that? Because I know what it's like to have your life destroyed by people who think money makes them untouchable. Her voice carried genuine sympathy beneath the calculated seduction. The family that killed your father. Do you know what happened to them? They're still wealthy, still influential, still untouchable. Not untouchable, just protected by people who value money more than justice. She leaned forward, her eyes intense with shared understanding. What if I told you there was a way to change that? To make sure they faced consequences for what they did? I'd say revenge fantasies don't bring dead fathers back. No, but justice served late is still justice. And some people need to learn that actions have consequences, even when those consequences take decades to arrive. The wine arrived, giving Marcus time to study her face. She was beautiful enough to stop traffic, but beneath the surface beauty lay something more dangerous: intelligence, determination, and a hunger for justice that matched his own buried desire for revenge. What does this have to do with Ethan Cross? He asked. Everything. Nothing. It depends on how willing you are to hear the truth about the man you've been working for. She pulled out her phone, showing him a document that made his blood freeze. It was a police report from 20 years ago, his father's accident investigation. But this copy contained details he'd never seen before, witness statements that had been suppressed, evidence that suggested the crash wasn't as accidental as he'd been told. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "From someone who's very good at finding buried secrets. Someone who understands that sometimes the only way to get justice is to dig up the past and force people to confront what they've done." Marcus read through the report with growing horror. The drunk driver hadn't just been wealthy. He'd been connected across industries through a web of family relationships and business partnerships. More damning, there were suggestions that the investigation had been influenced by phone calls from powerful people who wanted the matter resolved quietly. Ethan was involved in covering this up. Ethan was young then, probably didn't even know about it directly. But his family's influence, their network of connections, that's what protected your father's killer. That's what denied your family justice. The restaurant around them seemed to fade as Marcus processed the implications. The man he'd worked for, respected, even loved like a father figure, was connected to the injustice that had shaped his entire life. Not directly responsible, perhaps, but complicit in a system that valued wealth over justice. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because I think you deserve to know the truth. And because I think you're the kind of man who believes in accountability." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand in a touch that sent electricity through his entire nervous system. Her skin was soft, warm, and the contact felt more intimate than any kiss he'd ever shared. "I can't betray Ethan," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "He gave me opportunities no one else would. I'm not asking you to betray him. I'm asking you to consider that loyalty to someone who's been lying to you isn't really loyalty at all." The physical attraction was overwhelming, but it was her words that really seduced him. Marcus had spent years pushing down his anger about his father's death, telling himself that justice was impossible when the wealthy controlled the system. But here was someone offering him the chance to balance those scales. "What would you want me to do?" he asked. "Nothing illegal. Nothing that would hurt innocent people. Just share information about business deals that might be relevant to my investigations. Help me understand how Cross Industries really operates. Industrial espionage. Due diligence. I'm considering making investments that would put me in direct competition with Ethan's company. Anything you told me would be information a competitor could legally discover through research." The rationalization was thin, but Marcus found himself wanting to believe it. The combination of her beauty, her intelligence, and the promise of justice for his father created a perfect storm of temptation that overwhelmed his professional instincts. "One more question," he said. "What's your real connection to Ethan Cross? This feels personal." Zara's smile faltered for the first time that evening, revealing something vulnerable underneath the confident facade. "He's my father. And 17 years ago, he abandoned me and my mother because we weren't wealthy enough to deserve his love. The admission hung between them like a bridge across an impossible gap. Marcus understood abandonment, understood the hunger for justice that came from being discarded by people who should have protected you. In her eyes, he saw the same pain that had driven him to succeed despite every obstacle life had thrown at him. "Help me," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt more intimate than any seduction. "Help me show him that actions have consequences. Help me prove that some debts eventually come due." Marcus knew he was making a mistake that could destroy his career and possibly his life. But looking at her, beautiful, brilliant, wounded in the same ways he'd been wounded, he also knew he was past the point of rational decision-making. "What do you need to know?" he asked. Her smile was radiant enough to power the city skyline behind them. "Everything." Later, as they walked through the hotel lobby toward the elevators, Marcus felt the weight of his decision settling around him like a heavy coat. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, aligned himself with someone who could destroy everything he'd worked to build. But when Zara took his hand in the elevator, her fingers intertwining with his as they rose toward her penthouse suite, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. For the first time in 20 years, justice felt possible. And if that justice came wrapped in the most beautiful woman he'd ever met, who was he to question the universe's sense of irony? "Are you sure about this?" she asked as the elevator doors opened to reveal her private floor. Marcus looked into her eyes and saw his own hunger for justice reflected back at him. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The lie felt necessary, because the truth, that he was falling for a woman who could destroy him, that he was betraying a man who'd been like a father to him, that he was trading his integrity for the promise of revenge, was too complicated to admit even to himself. Have you ever been torn between loyalty and desire? Between what's right and what feels right? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in Marcus's situation. The past has a way of crawling out of graves, especially when someone has been digging with purpose for 17 years. Marcus woke in silk sheets that cost more than his monthly salary, surrounded by luxury that should have felt alien, but somehow felt like coming home. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows of Zara's penthouse, painting everything in golden tones that made the previous night feel like a beautiful dream. But the woman beside him was no dream. Zara lay on her stomach, her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled wine, her skin glowing in the morning light. The sheet had slipped low enough to reveal the elegant curve of her spine, and Marcus felt desire stir again despite the complications that daylight would bring. "Good morning," she murmured without opening her eyes. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in years," he admitted, then immediately wondered if honesty was wise with someone who collected secrets for a living. She rolled over, unself-conscious in her nakedness, and Marcus's breath caught. In the soft morning light, she looked younger, more vulnerable. The ruthless businesswoman from the restaurant had been replaced by someone who seemed almost fragile. "Any regrets?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Marcus considered lying, considered protecting himself with casual indifference. Instead, he found himself telling another truth. About last night? None. About what it means for today? Too many to count. Her laugh was soft and genuine. Honest. I like that in a man. She rose from the bed, utterly comfortable in her skin as she moved toward the bathroom. Marcus watched her go, memorizing the graceful way she moved, the confident set of her shoulders, the curve of her hips. When she disappeared behind the bathroom door, reality crashed back with devastating force. He'd slept with his boss's daughter. His boss's estranged daughter, who was actively trying to destroy the company Marcus had devoted his career to building. His boss, who had no idea Marcus even knew about their family connection. The complications were staggering. His phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Morning briefing in an hour. Need to discuss the Richardson situation. Marcus stared at the message, feeling like a traitor. In 12 hours, he'd gone from Ethan's most trusted advisor to someone actively working against him. The transformation felt surreal, like he'd become a character in someone else's story. "We're calling?" Zara emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a silk robe that somehow managed to be more seductive than her nudity had been. "Ethan wants a briefing. Perfect. Time to put our arrangement to work. The casual way she said our arrangement made his stomach clench. Last night had felt like passion, like connection, like something real. In the morning light, it looked more like recruitment. What do you need to know? He asked, hating how easily he'd slipped into the role of informant. Everything about the Richardson deal. Timeline, funding sources, potential weak points, and anything else that might be interesting. She sat beside him on the bed, close enough that he could smell her soap, something clean and expensive that made him want to pull her back into his arms. But the business tone in her voice created distance that physical proximity couldn't bridge. Zara, he said carefully, last night, was it real? Or was it just strategy? Her expression softened, and for a moment he saw the woman who'd shared her secrets with him over dinner, who'd trusted him with her pain. Do you really think I'd sleep with someone just to get business information? I think you're capable of anything when it comes to getting revenge on your father. You're right. I am. She stood, moving toward her closet with movements that seemed designed to torment him. But that doesn't mean last night wasn't real. It just means reality is more complicated than either of us expected. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of stolen touches and whispered conversations. Zara made coffee while Marcus showered, and they ate breakfast on her balcony overlooking Biscayne Bay. Under different circumstances, it would have been perfect, beautiful woman, luxury setting, Miami, sunshine warming their skin. But circumstances were never just circumstances when family secrets and business empires were involved. There's something else, Zara said as Marcus prepared to leave for his meeting with Ethan. Something about your father's death that I didn't tell you last night. Marcus felt ice in his veins despite the Florida heat. What? She handed him a manila envelope, her expression serious. Police evidence that was never released to your family. Witness statements that were suppressed. And something else that's going to be very hard to hear. Inside the envelope were documents that made his world tilt on its axis. Not just evidence that his father's death hadn't been a simple drunk driving accident, but proof that it had been covered up by people with enough power to rewrite police reports and silence witnesses. This can't be real, he whispered, staring at witness statements describing a second car, descriptions of what looked like a planned collision rather than a random accident. It's real, and it goes deeper than you know. She pulled out a photograph. Grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but unmistakably showing two men in conversation outside the police station the night of his father's death. One was the drunk driver's father, a man Marcus recognized from newspaper photos. The other was younger, wearing an expensive suit and looking like he owned the world. Who is that? Marcus asked, though something in his chest already knew the answer. Richard Cross, Ethan's father, the man who built Cross Industries into an empire by making problems disappear. The photograph fluttered from Marcus's numb fingers. 20 years of grief and anger suddenly had a target, a face, a name that connected to everything he'd built his adult life around. Ethan knew, he asked. Ethan was 25, fresh out of business school, desperate to prove himself to a father who demanded perfection. I don't think he knew the details, but he benefited from the outcome. Your father's death was covered up to protect a family that had business dealings worth millions with Cross Industries. Marcus sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was learning. His mentor, the man he'd respected and admired, was connected to the greatest tragedy of his life. Not directly responsible, perhaps, but complicit in a system that had denied his family justice. Why are you showing me this? He asked. Because you deserve to know the truth. And because I need you to understand that this isn't just about business rivalry or family drama. This is about justice that's been delayed for 20 years. She knelt beside his chair, her hand covering his in a gesture that felt genuinely caring rather than manipulative. Marcus, I know this is overwhelming. I know it changes everything you thought you knew about your life. But you can help me make sure that people who think they're untouchable finally face consequences for their actions. What kind of consequences? The kind that matter. Financial ruin, public humiliation, the destruction of everything they've built on other people's graves. Her eyes blazed with the passion that had first attracted him to her. I can't bring your father back, but I can make sure his death finally means something. Marcus looked at the documents spread across her coffee table. Evidence of corruption, cover-ups, and injustices that stretched back decades. His father's death was just one small part of a larger pattern of wealthy people using their influence to escape accountability. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "Keep being Ethan's trusted advisor. Keep gathering information about deals and strategies. And help me understand how Cross Industries really operates beneath the polished surface. That's not just corporate espionage. That's personal betrayal." Yes, it is. She didn't try to soften the truth or make excuses. The question is whether you can live with betraying someone who's been lying to you for 8 years, or whether you'd rather continue protecting the interests of people who destroyed your family. The choice should have been impossible. Ethan had been mentor, father figure, and friend. He'd given Marcus opportunities that had changed his life, trusted him with responsibilities that had built his career. But the evidence in front of him painted a different picture. Not of a man who'd helped him out of generosity, but of someone whose family had created the circumstances that required help in the first place. "There's a board meeting tomorrow," Marcus said slowly, "discussing the expansion into the Caribbean markets. If you're planning to move against those investments." "I am." "Then you'll need to know about the environmental impact studies that haven't been filed yet, and the local government officials who've been encouraged to support the project." Zara's smile was radiant with satisfaction and something that looked like pride. "Thank you." As Marcus left her penthouse and walked toward his car, he felt the weight of crossing a line he could never uncross. He was no longer Ethan's loyal employee. He was something more dangerous, a man with access to secrets and a reason to use them. But as he thought about his father, killed at 38, denied justice, forgotten by everyone except a son who'd spent 20 years wondering what if, Marcus found that betrayal felt remarkably like justice. The complicated truth was that some loyalties deserve to be broken. What would you do if you discovered someone you trusted was responsible for your family's tragedy? Share your thoughts in the comments about where you draw the line between loyalty and justice. Some women age gracefully into power. Others forge themselves in fire until they become unstoppable forces of nature. Amara Lawson stepped out of the black sedan at Miami International Airport, looking like she'd stepped off the cover of Forbes magazine. At 45, she'd grown into the kind of beauty that commanded boardrooms and conquered markets. Sophisticated, dangerous, and absolutely uncompromising. Her burgundy suit was perfectly tailored, her jewelry understated but expensive, and her presence radiated the confidence that came from building an empire with her bare hands. The driver who'd picked her up stammered through his introduction, clearly overwhelmed by the woman whose company had quietly become one of Chicago's most influential investment firms. Amara barely acknowledged him. Her attention focused on the Miami skyline, where her daughter was systematically dismantling the empire built by the man who'd abandoned them both. "Ma'am," the driver said as they pulled into traffic, "your daughter asked me to tell you that everything is proceeding according to schedule." "Of course it is," Amara replied, her voice carrying the kind of certainty that came from 17 years of careful planning. "Zara doesn't know how to fail. I made sure of that." The drive to the Four Seasons gave her time to process the reports Zara had sent over the past weeks. Photos of Ethan looking haggard and desperate. Financial documents showing the systematic destruction of deals he'd spent years building. Most satisfying of all, surveillance footage of him pacing his office like a caged animal, finally understanding what it felt like to have his world collapse around him. But as they pulled up to the hotel, Amara felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, but a complex mixture of anticipation and old, buried pain. Seeing Ethan again after 17 years would either close a chapter she'd been writing since Atlanta, or open wounds that had never properly healed. The penthouse suite Zara had reserved was elegant enough for royalty, but Amara barely noticed the luxury. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay, thinking about the scared 22-year-old girl who'd fled Atlanta with nothing but pregnancy hormones and heartbreak. That girl could never have imagined standing in a room that cost more per night than she'd made in a month. "Mother," Amara turned as Zara entered the suite, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. Her daughter had grown into everything Amara had dreamed she could become. Powerful, brilliant, beautiful enough to stop traffic, and smart enough to start wars. But beneath the designer clothes and confident bearing, Amara still saw traces of the little girl who used to ask why other kids had daddies and she didn't. "Baby girl," Amara said, opening her arms. The embrace that followed was fierce, protective, and loaded with 17 years of shared struggle and mutual devotion. "How do you feel?" Zara asked, stepping back to study her mother's face. "Being back in the same city as him?" "Powerful," Amara said honestly. "For the first time since Atlanta, I feel like I have control over my own story." They stood together at the windows, two women who'd built something extraordinary from the ashes of abandonment. The view stretched across Miami's downtown core, including the cross tower where Ethan was probably pacing his office, wondering how his carefully controlled world had spiraled so completely out of control. "He looks older," Zara said, pulling out her phone to show recent surveillance photos. "Tired, like the weight of his secrets is finally catching up with him." Amara studied the images of the man she'd once loved with desperate intensity. Ethan's silver hair and lined face made him look distinguished, successful, exactly what she'd expected him to become. But there was something in his eyes that looked hollow, like success had cost him more than he'd expected to pay. "Any regrets about what we're doing?" Amara asked. "None." Zara's voice carried the steel that had made her a billionaire before 30. "He made his choice 17 years ago. We're just making sure he lives with the consequences." "And Marcus? How was that complication developing?" Zara's expression softened in a way that made Amara's chest tighten with maternal concern. "That's more complicated than I expected. You're falling for him. I'm attracted to him. There's a difference." "Is there?" Amara moved to the bar, pouring 2 glasses of wine that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're making the same mistake I made, falling for someone connected to Ethan Cross." "Marcus isn't Ethan," Zara said, accepting the wine. "He's honest, decent. He genuinely cares about justice. He also works for the man we're trying to destroy. That creates conflicts that could tear apart everything we've built." Amara had seen the reports on Marcus Williams. Brilliant, hardworking, loyal to a fault. Exactly the kind of man who could make her daughter forget that business was business and revenge was a dish best served without emotional complications. "I can handle Marcus," Zara said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Can you?" "Because I've seen what happens when women in our family fall for men who work for cross industries. It doesn't end well." The parallel was uncomfortable but undeniable. Amara had fallen for Ethan despite knowing their worlds were incompatible. Now Zara was developing feelings for someone whose loyalty to Ethan could destroy everything they'd worked for. "This is different," Zara insisted. "Marcus has his own reasons for wanting justice. His father was killed because of cover industry's influence. We're on the same side. Are you? Or is he just telling you what you want to hear?" Before Zara could answer, her phone buzzed with a text that made her expression shift from defensive to predatory. "He's here." "Who's here?" "Ethan. Building security just reported that he's on his way up to the 23rd floor. Probably looking for me." Amara felt her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. After 17 years of wondering what she'd say when she saw him again, the moment had arrived with brutal suddenness. "Do you want me to handle this?" Zara asked, moving toward the door. "No." Amara set down her wine glass and checked her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was nothing like the scared girl who'd fled Atlanta. This was someone who'd built a fortune, raised a daughter, and survived everything life had thrown at her. "I think it's time I reminded Ethan Cross exactly what he threw away." The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt like traveling back in time. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs as floors ticked by, each number bringing her closer to the confrontation she'd been rehearsing for nearly 2 decades. By the time the doors opened, she transformed from nervous mother into the woman who negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching. The 23rd floor offices were all glass and steel, designed to intimidate visitors and project power. But Amara moved through the space like she owned it, her heels clicking against marble with the authority of someone who couldn't be intimidated by expensive furniture and city views. She found Ethan in Zara's office, standing with his back to the door, staring out at the Miami skyline. Even from behind, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man expecting attack from any direction. "Hello, Ethan." He spun around so quickly he nearly knocked over a chair, his face cycling through shock, recognition, and something that might have been longing before settling into careful neutrality. Amara. Her name on his lips carried 17 years of history. Love, betrayal, regret, and a dozen emotions too complex to name. For a moment, they just stared at each other across a space that felt both infinite and impossibly small. He looked older, distinguished in a way that successful men aged when life treated them kindly. Silver hair, expensive clothes, the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. But there were lines around his eyes that spoke of stress, and something in his expression that looked almost lonely. "You look," he started, then stopped, clearly struggling for words. "Successful," she suggested, moving closer with the predatory grace she'd learned in Chicago boardrooms. "Powerful, like the kind of woman who could actually afford to belong in your world." "Beautiful," he said quietly. "You look beautiful." The compliment hit her like a physical blow, stirring feelings she thought she'd buried under years of anger and ambition. This was the man who destroyed her faith in love, who'd taught her that security was the only thing that mattered, who'd forced her to become hard enough to survive raising his child alone. But he was also the man who'd given her the most beautiful summer of her life, who'd made her feel cherished and desired, who'd created the daughter that had become her greatest achievement. "What do you want?" she asked, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "I want to understand what's happening. Why you're here. Why Zara is trying to destroy everything I've built. Because you destroyed everything we tried to build first." The words hung between them, like an accusation and a confession rolled into one. Ethan's face crumpled slightly, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely ashamed. "I was young," he said. "Stupid. Scared of disappointing my family." "You were a coward," she corrected. "And your cowardice cost our daughter 17 years of having a father who cared enough to fight for her." "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." Amara moved to the window, looking down at the city they both now inhabited as equals rather than as rich man and struggling woman. "But I'm not here to relitigate the past. I'm here to discuss the future." "What kind of future?" She turned back to face him, noting how he'd moved closer while her attention was on the view. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, different now, more expensive, but still essentially him. Close enough to see the gray in his hair and the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when they were young and stupid and in love. The kind where actions have consequences, where people who think they're untouchable discover that money doesn't actually make them gods. Her voice dropped to the dangerous whisper she used in negotiations when she was about to destroy someone's dreams. The kind where you lose everything, just like we did. "Amara, please, let me explain what really happened." "I know what happened. Your family threatened to cut you off if you stayed with the poor black girl who wasn't good enough for their precious bloodline. And you chose money over love because you were too weak to fight for what mattered." Each word was chosen to wound, delivered with the precision of someone who'd had 17 years to perfect her argument. But watching Ethan flinch with each accusation, Amara felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, but a complex mixture of vindication and old, persistent pain. "You're right," he said simply. "About all of it. I was weak. I was scared. I chose security over everything that actually mattered, and I've regretted it every day since." The admission caught her off guard. She'd expected denials, excuses, attempts to justify his behavior. Instead, he was giving her the apology she'd dreamed of hearing, the acknowledgement that their love had mattered, that leaving her had been wrong. It should have felt victorious. Instead, it felt complicated, Regret doesn't pay medical bills, she said. Regret doesn't explain to a 6-year-old why her daddy doesn't want to see her. Regret doesn't keep you warm at night when you're working 3 jobs and wondering if you'll ever be anything more than the woman some rich boy abandoned. I know I can't fix what I broke, but maybe. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine remorse that looked like it had been eating at him for years. Maybe I could try to make things right now. Ow, I don't know. Tell me what you want. Tell me what would make this better. The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities. Amara could ask for money, for public acknowledgement, for apologies that might actually mean something. But what she wanted was more complicated than any of those things. What she wanted was to not still feel attracted to the man who'd broken her heart. What she wanted was to stop wondering what their lives would have looked like if he'd been brave enough to choose love over security. What she wanted was to hate him cleanly, without the messy complications of old feelings that apparently never completely died. I want you to understand what you cost us, she said instead. I want you to know what it felt like to be thrown away because we weren't valuable enough to fight for. Before he could respond, the office door opened and Zara walked in, stopping short when she saw her parents standing close enough to touch, staring at each other with an intensity that made the air crackle with unresolved tension. Am I interrupting something? Zara asked, her voice carrying dangerous undertones. Your father was just leaving, Amara said, stepping back to create distance that felt necessary for her sanity. But as Ethan moved toward the door, he paused beside her, close enough to whisper words only she could hear. I loved you. I love you still. And I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn it anyway. Then he was gone, leaving Amara standing in her daughter's office with her heart racing and her carefully constructed walls crumbling around the edges. Mother, Zara's voice carried concern and suspicion in equal measure. What just happened? Amara looked at her daughter, brilliant, beautiful, strong enough to take on the world and win, but also young enough to believe that love and justice were incompatible, that you had to choose between forgiveness and strength. Something complicated, Amara said finally. Something that might change everything. When was the last time someone saw your worth before you believed in it yourself? Have you ever felt both anger and attraction toward someone who hurt you? Share your experiences in the comments below. He built his empire on other people's graves, but he never expected the dead to have daughters who kept receipts. The evidence arrived across industries like a ticking bomb wrapped in legal documents. Marcus delivered it personally, walking into Ethan's office with a manila envelope that would either save or destroy everything they'd both built over the past 8 years. What's this? Ethan asked, looking up from quarterly reports that showed his empire hemorrhaging money faster than he could stem the bleeding. Something you need to see, Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. Something about my father's death 20 years ago. Ethan's face went pale as understanding dawned. The envelope felt heavy in his hands, weighted with secrets he'd hoped would stay buried forever. Inside were police reports, witness statements, and photographs that painted a picture of corruption stretching back decades. Marcus, Ethan started, but his protege held up a hand. Read it first, all of it, then we'll talk. The documents told a story that made Ethan's stomach churn with recognition and guilt. Marcus's father hadn't died in a random drunk driving accident. He'd been killed to protect a network of business relationships that included cross industries. The drunk driver was connected to families who'd made the cross fortune possible through decades of favorable deals and political influence. More damning were the photographs showing Ethan's father, Richard Cross, meeting with police officials and the driver's family in the hours after the accident. Money changing hands, witness statements being altered, evidence disappearing. You knew, Marcus said when Ethan finished reading. Maybe not the details, but you knew something wasn't right. Ethan set the documents down with trembling hands. I was 25. My father told me there had been an accident, that we needed to show support for business partners going through a difficult time. I didn't ask questions because I've been trained not to question his methods. Your family's support killed my father, and denied my family justice for 20 years. Where did you get this? From someone who's very good at digging up buried secrets. Marcus's voice carried pain and anger that 20 years hadn't diminished. Someone who understands what it's like to have your life destroyed by people who think money makes them untouchable. Ethan didn't need to ask who. Only one person had the resources and motivation to research incidents from decades ago, to compile evidence that could destroy his family's reputation and his business empire. Zara, your daughter. Yes. Marcus moved to the window, staring down at the 23rd floor where Zara's offices buzzed with activity. She's been very helpful in understanding exactly how Cross Industries built its fortune. The betrayal hit Ethan like a physical blow. For 8 years, Marcus had been his most trusted advisor, the son he'd never had, the protege who understood his vision and shared his ambition. To discover that Marcus was working against him felt like losing family. How long? Ethan asked. Does it matter? It matters to me. Marcus turned back to face him, and Ethan saw something he'd never noticed before, an anger that had been carefully hidden beneath years of professional loyalty. Since the night she showed me evidence that my father's death wasn't an accident. Since I learned that the man I've been working for built his career on my family's graves. Marcus, I swear to you, I didn't know. You didn't want to know. Just like you didn't want to know what happened to Amara after you abandoned her. Just like you don't want to know how many other people your family destroyed while building this empire. Each accusation felt like a nail in the coffin of everything Ethan had believed about himself. He'd always told himself that his success came from hard work and smart decisions, that his father's methods were from a different era, that he'd built something clean on foundations that might have been questionable. But the evidence in front of him painted a different picture. Cross Industries wasn't just successful. It was successful because people like Marcus's father had been eliminated when they threatened profits. What do you want? Ethan asked. I want justice for my father. I want accountability for 20 years of lies. And I want you to understand that some debts eventually come due, no matter how long it takes. Before Ethan could respond, his office door burst open and his wife, Catherine, strode in looking like an elegant hurricane. At 48, she was still beautiful in the polished way that came from excellent genetics and unlimited access to personal trainers, stylists, and cosmetic procedures. But her usual composure was cracked, her designer suit wrinkled, and her eyes blazed with fury. Ethan, she said, barely acknowledging Marcus's presence. We need to talk. Now. Catherine, this isn't a good time. It's about your bastard daughter and the destruction she's wreaking on our lives. Catherine threw a stack of newspapers and magazines on his desk, each one featuring headlines that made his blood freeze. Cross Industries under investigation. Real estate empire built on corruption. The sins of the father. How one family's greed destroyed lives. The articles were devastating, detailing decades of questionable business practices, political influence, and cover-ups that painted Cross Industries as a criminal enterprise masquerading as legitimate business. But worse than the accusations were the sources. Former employees, business partners, and government officials who'd apparently been waiting years for someone brave enough to ask the right questions. Ow, Ethan whispered. Your daughter has been very busy, Catherine said, her voice dripping with disdain. Apparently, she spent years documenting every questionable deal, every covered-up scandal, every dirty secret your family thought was safely buried. And now she shared it all with every journalist in America. Marcus picked up one of the newspapers, scanning an article that detailed the circumstances of his father's death with accuracy that could only have come from inside information. She didn't just dig up the past. She built a case. A case for what? Catherine demanded. Justice, Marcus said simply. Something that's been delayed for 20 years. Catherine turned on him with the fury of someone who'd never been denied anything she wanted. Justice? This isn't justice. This is revenge by a woman who's angry that her father chose respectability over scandal. Respectability? Marcus's voice carried disbelief. You call covering up murder respectable? I call protecting family interests practical. Something your father apparently never learned. The casual cruelty of her words hit Marcus like a slap. Ethan watched his protégé's face transform from professional disappointment to personal rage and realized that whatever loyalty might have remained between them had just been destroyed by his wife's unconscious arrogance. "Get out," Marcus said quietly. "Excuse me." Catherine's voice rose with indignation. "Get out of this office before I say something that ends your marriage and your social standing in the same sentence." The threat was delivered with such quiet menace that even Catherine recognized the danger. She looked to Ethan for support, but he was staring at Marcus with a growing realization that he'd lost more than an employee. He'd lost someone who might have been saved if different words had been chosen. "Marcus," Ethan said after Catherine stormed out, "she doesn't speak for me, doesn't she? Because from where I'm standing, her attitude explains a lot about how your family has operated for decades. People like my father, like Amara, like anyone who didn't fit your definition of worthy, you've all been disposable." "That's not true, isn't it?" Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. "I've worked for you for 8 years, Ethan. I've respected you, learned from you, even loved you like the father I lost. But I won't protect a legacy built on other people's graves. Not anymore. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to help Zara finish what she started. I'm going to make sure that everyone who's been hurt by Cross Industries gets the justice they've been denied." Marcus's hand was on the door handle when he delivered his final blow. "And I'm going to make sure that your empire burns as completely as the lives you've destroyed." After Marcus left, Ethan sat alone in his office, surrounded by evidence of his family's crimes and newspaper headlines that would destroy everything he'd spent his life building. The view from his windows, the city he'd helped shape, the buildings that bore his name, the empire that had defined his identity, all of it felt like sand slipping through his fingers. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoying your reading material? The real fun starts tomorrow. Z." Ethan closed his eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be 25 and in love, to believe that choices were simple and consequences were manageable. But that young man felt like a stranger now, someone who'd made decisions that had created a debt too large to repay. The empire he'd inherited and expanded was crumbling, but for the first time in decades, Ethan wondered if that might not be the worst thing that could happen. Maybe some legacies deserved to burn. Maybe some sins were too great to be forgiven by success. Maybe his daughter was giving him the only gift he actually deserved, the chance to finally face the consequences of his father's choices and his own cowardice. Can someone truly change after decades of selfish choices? What does real redemption look like when the damage seems irreversible? Share your thoughts in the comments. Nothing cuts deeper than watching your mother forgive the man who destroyed your childhood, especially when you've spent 17 years planning his destruction. Zara stood frozen in the doorway of the penthouse suite, watching her mother and Ethan locked in what looked like an embrace. The evidence folder lay scattered across the marble floor, its contents spread like accusations between them. But what she saw wasn't confrontation. It was something far worse: connection. "Get away from him." The words came out colder than Zara intended, but the ice in her voice matched the freeze spreading through her chest. Amara stepped back from Ethan as if burned. Her lipstick was smeared, and her perfectly styled hair showed signs of fingers running through it. The same hands that had once caressed Zara's face during childhood nightmares were now trembling from touching the man who caused those nightmares. "Baby, it's not what you think." "Don't." Zara held up her hand, stopping her mother mid-sentence. "Don't you dare lie to me. Not after everything we've been through. Not after everything he put us through." Ethan straightened his tie, his face showing more emotion than Zara had seen since the auction. Guilt mixed with something else, hope, relief. She couldn't tell, and she didn't want to know. "Zara, your mother came here to what? Fall back into bed with the man who called her poverty a stain on his legacy?" The words hit their target. Ethan flinched, and Amara's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for 17 years. Marcus appeared behind Zara, his hand finding her shoulder. His touch usually calmed her, but tonight it felt like the only solid thing in a world that had just shifted beneath her feet. "We found more evidence," Marcus said quietly. The FBI is building their case. They don't need his cooperation anymore. Amara turned to face her daughter, her voice breaking. That's exactly why I came here. To tell him it's over. To finally close this chapter. By opening your legs for him again. The cruelty in Zara's voice surprised even her. But the image of her mother's vulnerability in this man's arms had unlocked something dark inside her. The slap came fast and sharp. Amara's palm connected with Zara's cheek with a sound that echoed through the expensive suite like a gunshot. Marcus stepped forward, but Zara waved him back. I earned a right to make my own choices, Amara said, her voice steady despite the tears. You are not the only one who suffered. You are not the only one who lost something when he walked away. Ethan moved toward them, but Amara spun on him with the fury of a woman who'd been holding back for too long. And you, don't think for 1 second that this changes anything. I came here to tell you that we're done, that your debt is paid, that you can rot in prison knowing that you lost the only real thing you ever had. Then why did you kiss me? Ethan's question hung in the air like smoke. Amara's composure cracked. Because I needed to know if there was anything left worth saving. If the man I loved was still somewhere inside the monster you became. And he's dead. He died the night you chose money over love. What's left is just a ghost in an expensive suit. Zara felt her anger shift, redirecting toward the man who had the audacity to look hurt by her mother's words. You want to know what's funny, father? She spit the word like poison. All those years, Mom told me stories about you. About the man who made her laugh at her brother's funeral. About the man who bought her flowers every Tuesday because it was the day you met. She kept a part of you alive in me, and I hated her for it. Marcus squeezed her shoulder, grounding her. But she was right about one thing. That man is dead, and we killed him by trying to bring him back. The sound of sirens cut through the tension. Multiple cars, getting closer. They're not here for evidence, Marcus said, checking his phone. Ethan's business partner just turned state's evidence. They're here with arrest warrants. Ethan's face went white. How many charges? Enough to put you away for the rest of your life. The siren stopped outside the building. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, getting closer. Amara looked at her daughter, then at the man who had shaped both their lives through his absence. This is where we say goodbye, Ethan. Not as lovers, not as family, just as two people whose story finally ends. Mom, we should go. Zara's voice was gentler now, the anger replaced by something that looked like understanding. The knock on the door was sharp and official. Federal agents. Open up. As they moved toward the back exit, Zara turned back one last time. Ethan stood alone in the center of his expensive suite, surrounded by scattered evidence of his crimes, waiting for the consequences he'd spent 20 years avoiding. Don't feel sorry for him, Amara whispered, reading her daughter's expression. I don't, Zara replied. I feel sorry for us, for all the years we wasted hating him instead of loving each other. The door burst open as they disappeared down the service elevator, leaving Ethan to face his reckoning alone. 20 years of crime doesn't disappear overnight, but it can surface in a single morning when the right person decides to talk. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. News crews lined the street outside, their cameras following every person who entered the federal building. Ethan Cross, once the untouchable king of luxury real estate, now sat at the defendant's table in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, his empire reduced to ashes. Zara and Amara sat in the front row of the gallery, not as supporters, but as witnesses to justice. Marcus sat beside Zara, his father's murder file thick in his lap, evidence that had finally seen daylight after 20 years in the shadows. The government calls its next witness, the prosecutor announced. Vincent Moretti, Ethan's former business partner, walked to the witness stand like a man carrying the weight of 2 decades. His testimony had already implicated half of New York's elite in a web of corruption, murder, and financial fraud that stretched back to the early 2000s. Mr. Moretti, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? Vincent avoided looking at Ethan. He was my partner, my friend, and eventually the biggest mistake. The prosecutor held up a photograph. Do you recognize this man? James Walsh, Marcus's father. He He was our accountant until he discovered what we were really doing with the construction contracts. Marcus's hand found Zara's, their fingers intertwining as they listened to the truth about his father's death. He threatened to expose everything unless we cleaned up our act. Ethan said he would handle it. I thought he meant paying him off or finding him a new job. I didn't know he meant. What did the defendant do to James Walsh? He had him killed. Made it look like a heart attack. Ethan had connections in the medical examiner's office. Money talks, and dead accountants don't. The courtroom erupted. Judge Martinez slammed her gavel, demanding order, but the damage was done. Ethan's face had gone completely white, and his lawyer was frantically whispering in his ear. During the recess, Amara and Zara stood in the hallway, watching the media circus through the windows. Do you think he deserves this? Amara asked quietly. Zara considered the question. 6 months ago, her answer would have been immediate and vicious. Now, watching the man who had once commanded boardrooms sitting powerless in shackles, she felt something unexpected, emptiness. I think he deserves consequences, she finally said. But this doesn't feel like victory. It just feels sad. Marcus joined them, his face showing the same conflicted emotions. My father died because he tried to do the right thing. Ethan chose money over morality, and it cost good people their lives. But watching him fall apart in there, it doesn't bring my dad back. The question is, Amara said, what do we build from here? We've spent so much energy on revenge and justice. What happens when it's over? Before anyone could answer, Ethan's lawyer approached them. Mrs. Lawson, my client would like to speak with you and your daughter. Absolutely not, Zara said immediately. Please, he says he has something that belongs to you. Something he should have given you 17 years ago. Amara looked at her daughter. 5 minutes. That's all. The prison meeting room smelled like disinfectant and defeat. Ethan sat behind bulletproof glass, his hands shackled to the table. The man who had once worn $1,000 suits now looked smaller, older, broken. He pushed an envelope through the security slot. I wrote this the night you left Atlanta. I never sent it. Amara's hand shook as she opened the letter. Her eyes scanned the handwritten words, and tears began falling before she finished the first paragraph. What does it say? Zara asked. He was going to leave with me. He had plane tickets, a plan. He was going to give up everything for us. Ethan's voice came through the intercom, barely a whisper. My mother found the letter, found the tickets. She told me you'd already left, that you'd taken money and disappeared. I believed her because it was easier than fighting for what mattered. Zara stared at the man she'd spent her life hating. So what? You're telling us this changes anything? No, it doesn't change what I did, or what I became. But I need you to know that for one night, 17 years ago, I chose love. I chose you both. And that choice, even though I abandoned it, was the only real decision I ever made. Amara folded the letter carefully. Thank you for this, but it's 17 years too late. As they stood to leave, Ethan called out one last time. Amara? I know I don't deserve to ask, but what's her name? Our daughter. Amara stopped at the door without turning around. Zara. Her name is Zara Cross Lawson, and she's everything you'll never be. Revenge is sweetest when served with a choice between redemption and destruction, and she was about to give him both. 3 weeks after the trial, Zara sat alone in the prison visiting room, staring at the empty chair across from her. She'd been coming here every day for a week, signing in and then leaving without seeing him. Today felt different. Today, she had a decision to make. Ethan entered the room escorted by 2 guards, his orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his diminished frame. Prison had aged him rapidly. His hair was grayer, his shoulders more stooped, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and the weight of his crimes. You came, he said, settling into the plastic chair. Don't read anything into it. Zara's voice was steady, professional. This isn't about forgiveness or family bonding. This is business. Ethan nodded, waiting. The FBI wants your cooperation. Full disclosure about your network, your connections, your methods. In exchange, they're offering reduced sentencing, 15 years instead of life. And you're here because I convinced them to let me make the offer. Because whether you take it or not affects my future, and I don't like leaving my future in other people's hands. Ethan studied his daughter's face, searching for something familiar in her features. You look like her when she's angry. Your mother. That same fire in your eyes. Don't. I'm not trying to manipulate you, Zara. I've never had the chance to really look at you, to see what we created together. Zara leaned forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. What you created was a daughter who spent her childhood wondering why her father didn't love her enough to stay. What you created was a woman who built an empire just to prove she didn't need you. What you created was someone who spent the last 6 months deciding whether you deserve to die in prison or live long enough to see what you destroyed. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. The cooperation deal comes with conditions, Zara continued. You give them everything. Every dirty deal, every bribed official, every crime you committed or covered up. You help them clean up the mess you made. And in return, you get out when you're 65 instead of never. You get to see sunlight again. You get to breathe free air. Ethan's hands, shackled to the table, trembled slightly. What's the catch? Because there's always a catch with offers like this. Zara smiled, and for the first time, Ethan saw something of himself in her expression, a calculating coldness that spoke of strategic thinking. The catch is me. If you take this deal, if you cooperate and get out in 15 years, you can work for me. Your knowledge, your connections, your expertise, all of it belongs to me. You help me build something legitimate from the ashes of what you destroyed. And if I refuse, then you rot here until you die, and I build it without you. Either way, I win. The question is whether you get to be part of the solution or just another casualty of your own choices. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. Why would you want me involved in anything you're building? Why not just let me disappear? Zara's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something vulnerable underneath. Because I'm tired of being angry. Because Mom is tired of being hurt. Because somewhere under all the damage and disappointment, we're still family. And maybe redemption is possible for everyone. Even for me, especially for you. But redemption isn't free, Father. It costs everything you have left to give. Ethan looked down at his shackled hands, at the orange jumpsuit, at the concrete walls that had become his world. What kind of business are you building? Affordable housing, community development. Everything you used to destroy, I'm going to rebuild. But I'm going to do it right. No bribes, no shortcuts, no stepping on people to get ahead. That's not profitable, says the man sitting in federal prison for tax evasion and murder conspiracy. Zara's voice carried a sharp edge. Maybe it's time to try a different definition of success. A guard knocked on the glass, signaling that visiting time was almost over. I need an answer, Zara said, standing. The FBI won't wait forever, and neither will I. Ethan stood as well, the chains around his ankles clinking against the floor. If I do this, if I take your deal, what guarantee do I have that you won't just use me and throw me away when you're done? Zara met his eyes directly. You don't. You'll have to trust me. The same way Mom had to trust you 17 years ago. The same way I had to trust that someday someone would love me despite coming from you. And do they? Does someone love you despite me? For the first time during the visit, Zara's smile was genuine. Marcus asked me to marry him last week. So yes, someone loves me not despite where I came from, but because of who I chose to become. As the guards approached to escort Ethan back to his cell, he called out one last question. How long do I have to decide? 24 hours. After that, the offer expires, and you serve your full sentence. And if I say yes? Zara paused at the door. Then the real work begins. And Father, I don't accept failure from anyone. Some men spend their lives building monuments to their greatness. Others finally find greatness in tearing down what they built. The federal courthouse buzzed with anticipation as Ethan Cross prepared to testify against his former associates. News cameras lined the street, reporters updating their social media feeds with every development. Inside, the gallery was packed with victims' families, federal agents, and curious spectators who wanted to witness the fall of a king. Zara sat in the front row beside Marcus and her mother, watching as her father was sworn in. His orange jumpsuit had been replaced with a standard gray suit. Not expensive, but respectable. His hair was combed, his face shaved, but his eyes still carried the weight of everything he was about to reveal. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor began. "Ethan Michael Cross." "Mr. Cross, you've entered into a cooperation agreement with the federal government. Can you explain what that means?" Ethan's voice was steady, resolved. "It means I'm going to tell the truth about 20 years of criminal activity. All of it, even the parts that make me look like a monster. Let's start with the murder of James Walsh in 2003. The courtroom fell silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The confession that would either free Ethan's soul or damn it completely. James was our accountant. A good man. An honest one. Too honest for what we were doing. Ethan's hands remained folded on the witness stand. He discovered that we were laundering money through construction projects, bribing city officials, and skimming federal grants meant for low-income housing. What did Mr. Walsh threaten to do with this information? He said he would expose everything unless we stopped. He gave us a week to clean up our act, or he was going to the FBI. Marcus squeezed Zara's hand as they listened to the truth about his father's final days. What was your response to his ultimatum? Ethan's voice cracked slightly. I panicked. We had too much invested, too many people depending on the money flow. So I reached out to some contacts I had in the medical examiner's office. People who owed me favors. What kind of favors? I'd helped cover up some questionable autopsy reports in the past. Drug overdoses that were really suicides. Accidents that were really murders. When you control the flow of money in a city, you control the flow of truth. The prosecutor held up a medical file. Is this the falsified autopsy report for James Walsh? Yes. We induced a heart attack using potassium chloride and then had the real cause of death covered up. Made it look natural. His family never knew he was murdered. Marcus stood abruptly and walked out of the courtroom. Zara started to follow, but Amara caught her arm. "Let him process this alone first," she whispered. "Some truths need time to settle." The testimony continued for 3 hours. Ethan methodically destroyed the reputations and alibis of dozens of powerful men. He detailed bribes, murders, fraud schemes, and cover-ups that stretched back decades. With each revelation, his voice grew stronger, as if confession was lifting a weight he'd carried for too long. "Mr. Cross, why are you revealing all of this now? What changed?" Ethan looked directly at Zara for the first time since taking the stand. "I met my daughter 6 months ago, for the first time in her life. She asked me a question that I couldn't answer." "What question was that?" "She asked me what I was proud of, what I'd built that mattered, and I realized I couldn't think of a single thing. Everything I'd accomplished was built on other people's graves. Everything I owned was stolen from someone else. Everything I called success was really just elaborate failure." The prosecutor nodded. "And what do you hope to accomplish with your testimony today?" "I hope to give the families of my victims some closure. I hope to help clean up the corruption I helped create. And I hope," Ethan's voice broke completely, "I hope to prove to my daughter that somewhere inside the monster I became, there's still a man worth saving." During cross-examination, the defense attorneys tried to break Ethan's story to find inconsistencies or signs of fabrication. But his testimony remained consistent, detailed, and devastating. 20 years of careful record-keeping meant 20 years of evidence to support every claim. When court recessed for the day, Zara found Marcus sitting on the courthouse steps, staring at the traffic flowing past. "How are you holding up?" she asked, settling beside him. "My father died because he tried to do the right thing, and your father lived because he chose to do the wrong thing. For 20 years, he got away with murder while my dad was just gone. But now he's not getting away with it anymore." Marcus turned to look at her. "Does that feel like justice to you? Him getting 15 years for a murder that destroyed my childhood?" Zara considered the question carefully. Justice isn't about making the punishment fit the crime. It's about making sure the crime doesn't happen again. Your father died trying to stop corruption. Today, his death finally accomplished what he died for. You really believe your father has changed? I believe he wants to change. Whether he can actually do it, We'll find out in 15 years. Marcus smiled sadly. You're giving him a chance he doesn't deserve. Maybe, but second chances aren't about what people deserve. They're about what we choose to give. And I choose to give him a chance to prove he's better than his worst moment. Above them, the courthouse clock chimed 5 times, marking the end of another day in the pursuit of justice. Sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful from the ashes of what was destroyed, and letting love grow where hatred once lived. 5 years later, the Miami skyline gleamed with new construction, but these weren't the luxury towers that had once defined Ethan Cross's empire. These were affordable housing complexes, community centers, and small business incubators, all bearing the logo of Cross Lawson Development, a company built on principles that would have been foreign to its founder's original vision. Zara stood on the balcony of her office, watching families move into the latest completed project. Children played in courtyards designed for safety and joy, while their parents attended job training programs in the building's ground floor. This was what success looked like when it was measured in lives improved rather than profits maximized. The quarterly reports are ready for your review, Marcus said, entering the office with a stack of folders. 5 years of marriage had only deepened their partnership, both personal and professional. His MBA had proven invaluable in turning Zara's vision into sustainable reality. How are we doing? Profitable, but not obscenely so. Just like you planned. Marcus kissed her cheek as he set the reports on her desk. The board meeting is in an hour, and our special guest should be arriving soon. Zara nodded, her stomach tightening with familiar anxiety. Today marked a milestone she'd been both anticipating and dreading. Ethan's release from federal prison and his first day as a contracted consultant for the company built from his empire's ruins. Amara entered the office, carrying coffee and wearing the kind of smile that had taken years to rebuild. At 55, she'd found a different kind of happiness, not the desperate passion of youth, but the steady contentment of a woman who'd made peace with her past. He's here, she announced simply. Through the office windows, Zara could see a modest sedan pulling into the visitor parking area. Ethan stepped out, wearing clothes that looked new but inexpensive. 5 years in federal prison had changed him in ways that went beyond the gray hair and lined face. He moved differently now, less like a man who owned the world and more like someone grateful for whatever world would accept him. How do you feel about seeing him again? Marcus asked Amara. Nervous, hopeful, terrified. The usual emotions when someone you once loved gets a chance to prove they've changed. She paused, watching Ethan check his reflection in the car window, but mostly curious. I want to see who he's become when he's not performing for a jury or trying to impress a judge. The elevator chimed, and Ethan appeared in the doorway of the office, flanked by building security. He wore a simple navy suit that fit well, but cost a fraction of what he used to spend on clothing. His shoes were polished, but practical. Everything about his appearance suggested a man learning to live within different means. Reporting for duty, he said with a self-deprecating smile that looked genuine. Though I should warn you, it's been 5 years since I've used a computer that wasn't monitored by federal agents. Zara gestured to a chair across from her desk. We'll start simple. Community outreach, permit navigation, regulatory compliance. Things you understand, but used to use for evil instead of good. Fair enough. Ethan sat down, his posture respectful but not submissive. I brought something for you. For all of you. He pulled out 3 envelopes, each marked with a name in his careful handwriting. These are letters I wrote during my last year in prison. One for each of you. Consider them homework assignments. Things I needed to figure out about myself before I could ask for the chance to be part of what you're building. Amara opened hers first, scanning the handwritten pages with an expression that shifted from skepticism to surprise to something that might have been forgiveness. You attended therapy, she said. Anger management, addiction counseling, and something called restorative justice workshops. Turns out federal prison has better mental health resources than most luxury resorts. His attempt at humor was gentle, not bitter. I learned that the man who abandoned you wasn't strong or decisive. He was a coward who chose the easy path and spent 20 years running from the consequences. Marcus opened his letter next. You've been in contact with my mother. With your permission, I hope. She was kind enough to share stories about your father. About the man he was before I had him killed. I wanted to understand what I took from the world when I chose money over morality. Zara was the last to open her envelope. The letter was longer than the others, filled with questions rather than statements. You're asking me to define what redemption looks like, she said after reading for several minutes. Because I don't think I understand it yet. I know what punishment looks like. I know what consequences feel like. But redemption? That's something that has to be earned through actions, not just words. And I need to know what actions you require from me. The office fell quiet except for the sound of construction from the building project across the street. Another affordable housing complex that would provide homes for 100 families. Redemption looks like this, Zara said finally, gesturing toward the window. It looks like using everything you learned about manipulating systems to build better systems instead. It looks like spending the rest of your life making sure no other James Walsh dies for trying to do the right thing. And it looks like understanding that you'll never be our father and husband again, Amara added quietly. But you might become our friend, if you do the work. Ethan nodded, his eyes bright with something that looked like hope tempered by realism. Then let's get to work. As the Miami sun set over a city slowly healing from decades of corruption, for people who have been broken by greed and ambition began the harder work of building something better from the pieces. Love, it turned out, wasn't always about passion and romance. Sometimes it was about choosing to see the best in people despite their worst moments, and giving them the chance to prove that change was possible. The building across the street would be finished in 6 months. The family moving in would include a single mother working 2 jobs and her 8-year-old daughter who dreamed of becoming an architect. They would never know that their affordable, safe home existed because a man had finally learned the difference between what he wanted and what the world needed. And perhaps that was the most beautiful revenge of all, creating a legacy of healing that would outlast any monument to personal ambition. Love, revenge, redemption, which one wins in the end? Hit that like button if this story made you think about second chances. Subscribe for more stories that prove family isn't just blood, it's choice. Tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven him? And don't forget to check out our playlist of real American stories that inspired this tale. Until next time, keep believing that people can change, even when they don't deserve the chance.